The Galactic Academic Council had a problem. For the past 3,000 years, they'd been sitting on what they pompously called the final question, a mathematical theorem so mind-bendingly complex that it had reduced entire civilizations to drooling, calculator-clutching husks. The question lived in a sealed chamber on the neutral world of Cerebrix Prime, guarded by more security than most galactic treasuries. Why? Because solving it would prove, once and for all, which species deserved to be called the smartest in the known universe. Enter Professor Vex Tau Grimthought, the Council's chief examiner and professional dream crusher. Standing 8 feet tall with skin like purple velvet and eyes that glowed with the smugness of 10,000 failed dissertations, Vex Tau had personally watched 10,000 candidates break down in tears, madness, or spontaneous combustion when faced with the final question. His favorite hobby was collecting the twitching remains of shattered genius and displaying them in his office like academic trophies. Today's victim AR candidate was supposedly from a backwater species called humans from some insignificant mud ball in the Milky Way's armpit. The humans had somehow convinced the Council they deserved a shot at galactic intellectual supremacy, which was like watching a goldfish demand to compete in astrophysics. Vex Tau had seen the candidate's file: Jake Morrison, age 32, occupation listed as mathematician/part-time pizza delivery guy. The "pizza delivery guy" part had made Vex Tau's colleagues literally fall off their chairs laughing. Another primitive species about to learn their place in the cosmic hierarchy, Vex Tau muttered, polishing his ceremonial staff of academic superiority. How delightfully predictable. The chamber doors hissed open, and in walked the most underwhelming figure Vex Tau had ever seen. Jake Morrison looked exactly like what you'd expect from someone who delivered pizza between solving equations. Medium height, slightly messy brown hair, wearing jeans and a t-shirt that read, "I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why you're wrong." He was carrying a brown paper bag that smelled suspiciously like lunch. "You must be the examiner guy," Jake said, glancing around the chamber with all the reverence of someone checking out a public restroom. "Nice place." "Very purple. Is that intentional, or did someone have an accident with grape juice?" Vex Tau's left eye twitched. In 3 millennia of conducting these examinations, nobody had ever commented on his chamber's color scheme. "I am Professor Vex Tau Grimthought, Supreme Examiner of the Galactic Academic Council, holder of 47 advanced degrees, and destroyer of—" "Cool, cool," Jake interrupted, pulling a sandwich from his bag. "Mind if I eat while you do your whole speech thing? I skipped breakfast and my blood sugar gets wonky when I'm hungry. Makes me bad at math." The professor's other eye joined the twitching symphony. This human was either completely insane or possessing a level of confidence that bordered on the clinically fascinating. "You do realize," Vex Tau said slowly, "that you are about to attempt the final question. The mathematical theorem that has stumped every great mind in galactic history." Jake took a bite of his sandwich and shrugged. "Yeah, I read the pamphlet. Sounds fun. Can we get started? I've got a dentist appointment at 4. The observation deck buzzed with nervous energy as delegates from across the galaxy gathered to witness what everyone assumed would be humanity's spectacular intellectual face, this plant. Though Ambassador Linda Cross, Earth's diplomatic representative, stood at the viewing window wringing her hands like someone watching their teenager take their first driving test in a minefield. "This is a disaster," Linda muttered into her communicator. "Jake was supposed to be our best and brightest. Instead, we sent a guy who thinks quantum physics is pretty neat and once tried to fix a particle accelerator with WD-40. Next to her, Dr. Quantum Flippers, a crystalline being from Rigel Prime who looked like someone had crossed a chandelier with a pretentious philosophy professor, but sparkled with condescending amusement. "Fear not, Ambassador Cross. Your species' failure will be swift and relatively painless. We Regilians took 6 months to break down when faced with the final question. Your human will likely last, perhaps 3 minutes?" "That's optimistic," chimed in Professor Thinking McThinkface from Alpha Centauri, whose species was basically floating brains in jars. The Centaurians spent 2 years building a quantum computer specifically to tackle this problem. It achieved sentience just to tell us the question was impossible, then immediately committed digital suicide. Down in the examination chamber, Jake had finished his sandwich and was now examining the ancient pedestal that held the final question. The pedestal itself was a work of art, carved from crystallized starlight and inscribed with warnings in 47,000 different languages. Most of them roughly translated to abandon hope, all ye who think here. So this thing has been stumping everyone for 3,000 years? Jake asked, pointing at the sealed containment unit. What happens when someone fails? Vextal's smile was the kind typically reserved for funeral directors and tax auditors. Failure results in immediate mental breakdown, followed by a lifetime of drooling and muttering equations that make no mathematical sense. We have excellent care facilities, though the food is terrible. Jake said, nodding thoughtfully. And nobody's ever solved it? Nobody, Vextal confirmed. The Hyperion Collective sent their greatest mathematical minds, all 50,000 of them working in perfect mental harmony. They lasted exactly 4 seconds before achieving what they called catastrophic intellectual fragmentation. The Zephyrians tried using their species' natural ability to perceive 17 dimensions simultaneously, added Dr. Flippers from the observation deck. They immediately went blind and began speaking in mathematical poetry that gave everyone headaches. Jake scratched his chin. What about artificial intelligence? Surely someone built a computer smart enough. Oh, they tried, Vextal said, warming to his favorite subject of universal failure. The mechanoids built the greatest thinking machine in galactic history. It took one look at the final question, printed out a message saying nope, and transformed itself into a coffee maker. A coffee maker? Quite a good one, actually. Still in use in the council's break room. Jake looked genuinely impressed. That's actually pretty smart. Sometimes the best solution is knowing when to give up and make coffee instead. The comment sent ripples of confusion through the observation deck. Ambassador Cross put her head in her hands. This wasn't confidence, this was complete disconnection from reality. Jake was treating the galaxy's greatest intellectual challenge like a mildly interesting crossword puzzle. Shall we begin? Vextal asked, his voice dripping with the anticipation of watching another mind crumble. I should warn you, the moment I open this containment unit, the final question will be displayed in all its reality-breaking glory. Are you prepared? Jake cracked his knuckles and grinned. Hit me with your best shot, purple guy. The containment unit opened with a sound like the universe clearing its throat. What emerged wasn't just a mathematical equation, it was a 3-dimensional holographic nightmare that seemed to exist in several realities simultaneously. Numbers and symbols twisted through space, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. The equation stretched across multiple dimensional planes, incorporating physics that shouldn't exist and mathematics that made grown professors weep. Up in the observation deck, Dr. Quantum Flippers immediately began making a sound like wind chimes having a nervous breakdown. Oh no, not again, he crystallized. I can feel my molecular structure getting confused just looking at it. Professor Thinking McThinkface's brain jar started bubbling violently. It's beautiful, he whispered. Beautifully horrible. Like watching the concept of mathematics commit suicide by complexity. Ambassador Cross closed her eyes. I can't watch. Someone tell me when it's over. Down in the chamber, Jake stood with his hands on his hips, studying the equation like someone examining a particularly challenging Sudoku puzzle. The final question hung in the air before him, its mathematical tendrils reaching out to probe his mind for weaknesses. According to every expert in galactic history, this was the moment when sanity traditionally packed its bags and left for a nice vacation somewhere far away. Interesting, Jake said. Vextal blinked. That wasn't the usual response. The usual response was screaming, followed by the mathematical equivalent of speaking in tongues. You're not experiencing any mental distress? Should I be? Jake asked, walking around the equation to examine it from different angles. I mean, it's complicated, sure, but it's not like it's actively trying to eat my brain or anything. Actually, Vextal said faintly, it is actively trying to eat your brain. That's part of its defense mechanism. Jake paused and looked at the equation more carefully. Oh yeah, I can feel that now. Sneaky little thing, isn't it? He reached out and literally swatted away a mathematical tendril that was trying to worm its way into his skull. Bad equation. No brain eating. The observation deck fell silent except for the sound of several advanced civilizations questioning everything they thought they knew about reality. How is he doing that? Whispered Dr. Flippers. The equation's psychic mathematical assault should have reduced him to a gibbering mess by now. Maybe humans are naturally resistant to advanced mathematics? Suggested Professor McThinkface hopefully. Ambassador Cross opened one eye. Have you seen our education system? We're barely resistant to basic mathematics. Back in the chamber, Jake had pulled out a small notebook and was jotting down observations. Okay, so we've got a multi-dimensional theorem incorporating quantum mechanics, temporal paradoxes, and what looks like, is that recipe for cosmic brownies mixed in there? Vextal's jaw dropped. You can read the cosmic brownie theorem? That's been embedded in the equation for 2 millennia. No one has ever been able to identify it, let alone understand its significance. Well, it's right there between the reality-bending mathematics and the stuff about parallel universe tax codes, Jake said, pointing with his pencil. Though I've got to say, whoever embedded this was either a genius or really, really hungry when they were working. The equation pulsed, as if offended by Jake's casual analysis. New layers of complexity began unfolding, mathematical concepts so advanced they existed in theoretical dimensions that most species hadn't discovered yet. Oh, now you're just showing off, Jake said to the equation. Look, I get it. You're very impressive. Very cosmic and mysterious and whatnot. But at the end of the day, you're still just a math problem. And I've been solving math problems since I was 7. Vextal felt something he'd never experienced in 3,000 years of academic superiority, doubt. The traditional approach, Vextal explained, watching Jake study the equation with growing unease, is to begin with the fundamental quantum matrices and work through each dimensional layer sequentially. The Hyperion Collective developed a 17-stage methodology that… Nah, Jake interrupted, waving his pencil dismissively. That's way too complicated. Look, you've got all these fancy mathematical frameworks and theoretical constructs, but you're missing the obvious solution. Obvious? Vextal's voice cracked like a teenager asking someone to prom. There is nothing obvious about the final question. It incorporates mathematical principles that exist beyond the boundaries of known reality. Jake shrugged. Sure, but at its core, it's still just asking what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. Except dressed up with a bunch of cosmic math to make it sound fancy. In the observation deck, every advanced civilization's representative experienced what humans would call the sound of their worldview shattering. Dr. Quantum Flippers actually cracked. Literally, a small fracture appeared in his crystalline structure. That's impossible, Professor McThinkface bubbled. The final question encompasses the fundamental nature of existence itself. It cannot be reduced to a simple philosophical paradox. Watch me, Jake said cheerfully. He pulled out what appeared to be a standard Earth calculator, the kind you could buy at any office supply store, and began punching in numbers. See, the problem with all you galactic superbrains is that you overthink everything. Sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem is to ignore the parts that make it impossible. Ambassador Cross opened both eyes. Please tell me he's not solving the universe's greatest mathematical challenge with a $20 calculator. He's solving the universe's greatest mathematical challenge with a $20 calculator, confirmed Dr. Flippers weakly. Jake was now drawing diagrams in his notebook that looked suspiciously like the kind of sketches mechanics make when explaining why your car is making that weird noise. Okay, so if we treat this dimensional phase variance like a timing belt, and the quantum uncertainty principle like a stuck carburetor, you're applying automotive repair logic to cosmic mathematics, Vextal said, his voice hollow with disbelief. Why not? Both involve figuring out why something isn't working the way it should, Jake replied. And both usually come down to either cleaning the connections or hitting something with a wrench until it cooperates. As if to demonstrate his point, Jake reached out and literally tapped one of the equation's more stubborn mathematical components. The component flickered and suddenly reorganized itself into a much simpler form. See? Percussive maintenance. Works on everything from washing machines to multidimensional theorems. Vextal sat down heavily in a chair that materialized from pure shock. In the observation deck, representatives from civilizations that had spent centuries studying advanced mathematics were frantically taking notes on Jake's approach. The Zephyrians had already dispatched a research team to Earth to study human repair manuals. But the theoretical implications, Professor McThinkface protested weakly. The mathematical elegance, the cosmic significance. Still there, Jake said, not looking up from his calculations. Just wrapped up in a lot less pretentious packaging. It's like those fancy restaurants that serve tiny portions on huge plates. Same food, less showing off. The final question, perhaps sensing that its reputation was in serious danger, began pulsing more urgently. New layers of complexity erupted from its core, mathematical concepts so advanced they existed in dimensions that were still theoretical to theoretical mathematicians. Jake glanced up at the display and sighed. Really? We're going to do this the hard way? He cracked his knuckles again and smiled. What happened next would be studied by xenopsychologists for generations. Jake Morrison, armed with nothing but a cheap calculator, a half-eaten sandwich, and the kind of practical logic that comes from fixing broken appliances on weekends, began systematically dismantling 3,000 years of academic tradition. The problem, Jake explained, sketching what looked like a flowchart in his notebook, is that everyone's been treating this like it's supposed to be hard. But what if it's not? What if the whole point is that you're overthinking it? He pointed at a particularly complex section of the equation. Take this bit here. Looks all scary and multidimensional, right? But if you ignore the fancy formatting and just focus on what it's actually asking. Jake scribbled some numbers. It's basically if train A leaves the station at light speed and train B exists in 17 dimensions simultaneously, when do they meet for coffee? That's not how cosmic mathematics works, Vextal whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Says who? Jake asked. Look, I've been doing word problems since elementary school. Doesn't matter if it's apples and oranges or quantum states and temporal paradoxes, the logic is the same. In the observation deck, Ambassador Cross was experiencing something between pride and terror. He's actually doing it, she breathed. That magnificent, completely insane bastard is actually solving it. Dr. Quantum Flippers had developed several more stress fractures. This violates everything we know about advanced mathematics. Maybe what we know is wrong, Professor McThinkface suggested quietly. His brain jar had stopped bubbling and was now perfectly still, the thinking equivalent of a stunned silence. Jake had moved on to what the Galactic academic community called the impossibility sector, a section of the equation that existed in negative mathematical space and had been known to cause calculators to file restraining orders. Jake looked at it for about 30 seconds, then wrote something in his notebook. What did you write? Vextal asked, leaning forward despite himself. Insufficient data, Jake replied. This section is asking a question based on incomplete information, so the answer is to get more information. It's like trying to solve x equals what, without knowing what x is supposed to equal. The answer isn't some cosmic number, it's ask a better question. The impossibilities sector flickered, then collapsed into a simple statement, "Data request acknowledged." Vextal's remaining composure crumbled like a sandcastle in a tsunami. That section has existed unchanged for millennia. Entire civilizations have gone extinct trying to solve it. Because they were trying to solve an unanswerable question instead of pointing out that it was unanswerable, Jake said reasonably. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is admit when you don't have enough information. He was now working on the final section, the part that incorporated what ancient mathematicians had called the paradox of universal truth. It was a mathematical loop that supposedly contained the answer to existence itself, but in a form that made it impossible to understand. Jake stared at it for a moment, then laughed out loud. "What's so funny?" Vextal asked weakly. "It's the answer to life, the universe, and everything," Jake said, grinning. "Literally. Someone embedded that old joke into cosmic mathematics. The answer is 42, by the way. Always has been." The final question began to pulse rapidly, its 3,000-year-old defenses crumbling under an assault of practical common sense and dad joke logic. Mathematical theorems that had stumped galactic civilizations were being solved with techniques Jake had learned in high school algebra. But the cosmic implications, Vextal cried. The universal significance. "Still significant," Jake said, making final notes in his notebook. "Just turns out the universe has a sense of humor. Who knew?" "Boo?" The final question gave one last desperate pulse, then collapsed into a simple, elegant formula that looked suspiciously like something you might find in a first-year physics textbook. "And that," "Meh," Jake said, closing his notebook, "is how you solve the universe's greatest mathematical mystery with the power of not taking yourself too seriously." The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for moments just after someone accidentally breaks something really, really expensive. Jake stood there, hands in his pockets, whistling a tune while the greatest minds in galactic history tried to process what had just happened. "So," Jake said eventually, "is there a bathroom around here? All that thinking made me need to." "You solved it," Vextal screamed, leaping to his feet with the kind of energy usually associated with people who've just been struck by lightning. "It's 3,000 years. 3,000 years of academic tradition, and you solved it with a calculator and a sandwich." "Well, the sandwich was just for lunch," Jake clarified. "Though I guess good nutrition helps with problem solving." Up in the observation deck, Dr. Quantum Flippers was having what could only be described as a crystalline nervous breakdown. His molecular structure was shifting through colors that didn't have names, making sounds like a broken wind chime in a hurricane. "This changes everything," Professor McThinkface bubbled frantically. "Everything. We need to rewrite our entire understanding of advanced mathematics. We need to study human educational systems. We need to." "Take a deep breath and maybe make some coffee?" suggested Ambassador Cross, who was still processing the fact that her species had just accidentally conquered the galaxy's intellectual high ground while looking for a bathroom. Jake was examining his cheap calculator with interest. It's not even smoking. Usually when I solve something really complicated, electronics start making angry noises." Vextal was pacing back and forth, muttering to himself in 17 different languages. "The implications are staggering. If a human can solve the final question, what does that say about our understanding of intelligence? Of complexity? Of the fundamental nature of academic superiority? Maybe it says that sometimes the smartest guy in the room is the one who doesn't know he's supposed to be intimidated," Jake offered helpfully. "I mean, if I'd known this was supposed to be impossible, I probably would have been too nervous to think straight." The observation deck erupted in chaos as representatives from dozens of civilizations began frantically contacting their home worlds. The news was spreading across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds. The humans had done the impossible, and they'd done it while asking about bathroom locations. "What happens now?" Ambassador Cross asked, joining the group in the chamber. "I mean, traditionally, what's the protocol when someone actually solves this thing?" Vextal stopped pacing and looked at her with the expression of someone whose entire worldview had just been replaced with a completely different, much simpler worldview that came with assembly instructions. I don't know, he admitted. The protocol assumes failure. It's always assumed failure. We don't have a procedure for success because success was theoretically impossible. Sounds like you need a human to help figure that out too, Jake said cheerfully. We're pretty good at making things up as we go along. Speaking of which, seriously, where's the bathroom? I don't want to be rude, but biological necessities wait for no cosmic breakthrough. And so it was that humanity's greatest intellectual triumph was immediately followed by their representative asking for directions to the nearest restroom. The galaxy would spend decades studying this moment, trying to understand the profound philosophical implications of Jake Morrison's casual approach to cosmic mathematics. But Jake himself was already thinking about more important things, like whether the council cafeteria had decent pizza and whether he'd be home in time to help his neighbor fix his lawnmower. After all, the universe's problems could wait. Some things were more important than being the smartest species in the galaxy, like knowing where to find a good bathroom when you really need one.